Dad, it's a small Christmas this year. That was my son Douglas on speakerphone. His voice rehearsed the way people rehearse when they know a thing is cruel. I was standing at my kitchen sink, thumb pressed against the chipped coffee mug my late wife had used every morning for 31 years. Behind him, I could hear my grandson Caleb ask, "Is that Grandpa?" And Douglas say, softer, "Buddy, go finish your homework." Then he cleared his throat and said the sentence I had been half expecting all week. "Melissa and I talked. It's gonna be adults only. Just easier that way." I did not argue. I said, "Understood, son." I hung up. I stood at that sink for a long time, listening to the ice maker in the freezer stutter, and I noticed my hands were perfectly steady, which surprised me. 43 years on the volunteer rescue roster teaches you a lot of things, and one of them is that your hands do not shake for grief. They shake for cold. Outside my kitchen window, the sky was that flat pewter color that means an ice storm before midnight. My pager was on the counter, silent. But to understand how a man ends up on every news station in the state before either of his children can call him back, I have to take you 6 days early. 6 days earlier, my daughter Melissa left me a voicemail from the parking lot of the private school where my granddaughter takes riding lessons. I could hear the horses in the background. "Daddy, listen, so Kevin's parents are flying in from the coast and it's going to be very formal, and the guest room situation is complicated. And we all just thought maybe you'd be more comfortable at your place this year. We'll do a proper visit in the spring." She said "we all" the way people say it when they mean two people had a phone call about you. I played the message twice, standing in my garage, the pull cord of an old 2-stroke saw hanging by my ear. Then I walked back inside, and I did what I have done every Christmas Eve since I was 22 years old. I laid out the turnout gear Nora Ellsbury washed for me at the Firehouse laundry, checked the batteries in the 2 flashlights I keep on the dashboard, and packed a small canvas overnight bag. Not for their houses, in case. Ellen used to laugh at that bag. "Walter," she'd say, "you are the only man in this county who packs pajamas for a house fire." I zipped it shut anyway. Then I sat at the kitchen table and thought about picking up the phone and telling Melissa the truth about the night her mother died. I didn't. I hadn't for 11 years. I wasn't going to start on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 days after Melissa's voicemail, Douglas called me from the parking garage of the finance building where he works. I could tell by the echo. He led with weather, which is how he leads with everything he does not want to lead with. "Roads are supposed to get bad up there. You should batten down." I said, "I've driven this county and worse." He was quiet for a beat, and then he said, "Look, Dad, Sarah's mother is doing the whole thing this year, and she gets, protective about her table. And with the kids' schedules," I let him talk. "I have learned over a very long life that when a person is building a fence around a decision, you should let them finish the fence before you say anything." He finished it. He said, "Just easier if we do a video call Christmas morning." Then, because Douglas has always been the kind of man who cannot resist explaining himself one sentence too long, he added, "Caleb keeps asking if you're coming. I told him you had a rescue thing." My jaw tightened at the word thing. 43 years of my life folded up and stuffed inside that word. I said, "Tell Caleb his grandpa loves him." Douglas said, Yeah, of course." Then he hung up before either of us had to sit with what he had just done. That night, the pager on my counter went off for a chimney fire on Sycamore Road, and I was almost grateful for it. The morning of Christmas Eve, I drove to the volunteer firehouse before the sun cleared the ridge. Raymond Kowalski was already there, filling the coffee urn with the same brown-stained scoop we have used since the county board wouldn't buy us a new one in '94. Raymond looked up. "Cap, thought you'd be at the Daughters by now." I set my bag down on the bench under the coat hooks. "Change of plans?" He knew me too well to ask. Instead, he said, "Roads out on County 9 are already glass. 2-car pileup last night. No injuries, but that's a warning shot." I nodded and poured a cup. On the far wall, above the dispatch radio, hung a photograph so old the emulsion had gone yellow. Me at 24. a mustache I have since had the good sense to shave, standing next to the man who trained me, Chief Ellsbury, Nora's father, dead now 19 years. Under the photograph was a hand-lettered sign, "We go when no one else will." I had lettered it myself in '79. Raymond followed my eyes. "The board is planning something for you," he said, and then he caught himself, like he had said too much. I looked at him. "Planning what?" He busied himself with the urn. "Nothing. Nora's business. Ask her." He would not meet my eye. Somewhere on the highway, 6 miles out, a young mother was already tightening her grip on a steering wheel she was about to lose. I left the firehouse a little after 4 in the afternoon. Raymond told me to text him when I got in. I told him I would. I did not tell him I had nowhere in particular to be. The sun was already gone behind the tree line, the sky the color of wet slate, and the freezing rain had started in that light way that fools people, the way a first drink fools people. I took the long county road home on purpose. I always have. That road passes the reservoir, and the reservoir is where a boy went through the ice one November night 41 years ago. And I stayed on that ice for 11 minutes with a rope around my waist, and my wife did not see me again until nearly dawn. That was the first night she ever said the sentence that would come back on the last night of her life. "Walter, you can't help me here. Go." I had thought about that sentence more times than any man should have to. My wipers were beating slow. On the passenger seat sat the canvas bag, and inside the bag, folded between 2 undershirts, was a letter I had written to Ellen the night she died, that I had never mailed, because you cannot mail a letter to a woman who is already gone. My headlights caught something up ahead on the shoulder, a shape too tall and too still to be right. I eased my foot off the accelerator. My pager, silent for 3 hours, chose that exact moment to chirp. The shape resolved into a sedan turned nose down in the drainage ditch, front end folded up against a locust tree, hood lifted and smoking through the scene. The driver's door hung open. No one was standing near it. I pulled onto the shoulder ahead of the wreck, kicked the hazards on, and reached under my seat for the small canvas roll where I keep the seatbelt cutter, 2 chemical lights, and a pair of leather gloves. I was out of my truck before I had time to think about my knees. Ice was already forming on the pavement. From 20 feet away, I could hear the sound I have hated for 43 years, the low, fluttering hum of a fuel line venting under a hot manifold. I got to the driver's door and looked in. A woman, 30 maybe, forehead cut, seatbelt still locked, both hands on the wheel like she had frozen to it. In the back seat, 2 car seats, one occupied, the other empty. My heart, which had been steady all afternoon, took one hard step sideways. "Ma'am," I said, "my name is Walter. I am a rescue captain. Where is your other boy?" She could not answer. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I put my hand on her jaw, gently, and turned her face toward mine. "Ma'am, look at me. Where is your other boy?" A small voice, muffled, came from somewhere I could not yet see. "Mama." That was the word. Not from inside the car, from underneath the front of it. The impact had popped the passenger door, and a small child, 4 maybe, had been thrown clear of his booster and was now wedged between the front tire and the crumpled fender, half in the ditch water, half out. He was awake. He was looking straight up at the smoking hood 6 inches above his face. I lay flat on the ice and reached under. "Hey, buddy. Hey, my name is Walter. I'm gonna get you out of there. I need you to stay very still." He said, in the small, clear voice small children use when they have decided to be brave, "The car is hot." I said, "I know it is. That is why I am here." Behind me, a car slowed and stopped. I did not look up. I heard a young man's voice ask, "You need help?" I said, without turning, "Call 911. Tell them County Road 2, mile marker 11, vehicle fire, entrapment, 3 souls. Then stand back 40 feet. Do not come closer. Do you hear me?" He said yes, and he did exactly what I told him. And I would learn much later that he was also holding up a phone. I did not know that. I would not have cared. I got both my arms under that child's shoulders. The fuel hissed, and behind us, from inside the car, a woman started to scream. I told the boy his name was going to be Champion for the next 30 seconds because champions do not move their necks. I put him out on a slow, steady count, and I did not let his head loll. When his boots cleared the tire, the young man behind me made a sound like he had been holding his breath for a year. I carried the boy 20 paces from the car and set him down on my folded coat and told him to look at the sky and count stars, even though the sky was cloud from edge to edge. Then I turned and went back. The mother's seatbelt was jammed. It always is. I cut it with the tool from my roll and told her, "Ma'am, I am going to take your weight on 3. I got her out through the driver's door on a fireman's carry across my shoulders, which is a thing my back was going to have opinions about later, and I got her clear of the vehicle a full minute before the engine compartment lit. The older boy in the back was still strapped in his car seat, and I cut the entire seat free at the anchor points and carried the seat like a basket. I did all of this in what the dispatch log would later say was 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Long enough for a stranger with a phone to record every second of it. Short enough that neither of my 2 children, 300 miles apart, had any idea it was happening. The young man with the phone turned out to be a 20-year-old community college student named Trevor driving home from a night shift. When the state trooper finally arrived, Trevor was still standing 40 feet back where I had told him to, phone still up, hands shaking so badly the trooper had to take the phone out of his fingers. I did not talk to Trevor that night. I was on my knees on the shoulder with the mother's coat around her, checking the older boy's pupils with a pen light from my glove box. The younger boy, the one I had pulled out from under the hood, was on the ambulance stretcher already, telling a paramedic named Angie that his name was Champion. The trooper came over and crouched next to me. "Cap," he said, because everybody in this county calls me Cap whether I want them to or not. "You all right?" I said, "I'm fine. She's the one." He watched me for a second. "You know that kid was filming." I said, "I did not." He said, "It's already up. Somebody's already reposted it. Chief's been calling you." I looked at my phone. 17 missed calls. 14 from Raymond, 2 from Nora Ellsbury, and 1, this one I stared at for a long time, 1 from my son Douglas at 6:41 p.m., which was after the footage had gone up and before anyone had told him whose face was on. I did not call Douglas back that night. I drove home at 40 miles an hour on glass, and I let myself into my kitchen at almost 1 in the morning, and I sat down at the table without taking my coat off. My hands were finally shaking. Somewhere in a city 300 miles east, my son Douglas was sitting on the edge of his guest bed watching a video his wife had airdropped him from her phone with the caption, "Isn't this your dad?" I would learn all of this later, in pieces, from Caleb. Caleb told me his father watched the video 4 times without saying anything. Then his father went into the bathroom and closed the door and did not come out for a long time. When he came out, his eyes were red, and he said to Caleb's mother, "I told him it was a rescue thing." Caleb, who is 9 and who does not miss much, said, "Dad, was Grandpa supposed to come here for Christmas?" And Douglas, my son, the ambitious one, the one who wears the good watches, sat down on the edge of the bed next to Caleb and put his face in his hands and said, "Buddy, go to sleep." That is the version I got much later. On Christmas morning, I did not know any of it. I only knew my phone would not stop ringing, and the one number I was waiting on was not the one that was called. I made coffee in the mug Ellen used. I fried 2 eggs I did not eat. I turned on the little television above the refrigerator to check the weather, and there, filling the screen, was my own face. Younger looking than I feel, hair matted, coat unbuttoned, carrying a child's car seat like a laundry basket across the shoulder of the highway. The station had cut it with a slow zoom and a piece of music I did not care for. A woman with careful hair was calling me a hero. I turned it off. I sat down. The phone rang. Caller ID said Melissa. I let it go to voicemail because I did not trust my voice yet. She left a message. I could hear her husband Kevin in the background, agitated, telling her what to say. Melissa said, "Daddy, oh my God, Daddy, we just saw. Are you all right? Please call me. Kevin says, Daddy, please call." The message ended, and I sat there, and I noticed something I had never noticed in 50 years of being her father. She had not, in that message, asked me where I had spent the night. She had not asked whether I had eaten. She had not, above all, said the word Christmas. She had asked whether I was all right, which in the language of my daughter is not the same question as "Are you hurt?" It is the question a person asks when they have just been shown a mirror they did not want to see. The first call I picked up that morning was from Caleb, on his mother's phone, without permission. He was whispering, "Grandpa." I said, "I'm here, buddy." He said, "Grandpa, my friend Marcus sent me a video, and it's you. He said his mom said you saved a whole family. Is it really you?" I said, "It's really me." He was quiet a long time. Then he said, in the specific voice a 9-year-old uses when he has just realized adults have been lying to him about something important, "Grandpa, why aren't you here?" I closed my eyes. I had not planned to answer that question honestly. I had planned to protect his father the way I have protected his father his entire life. But there is something about the voice of a 9-year-old on Christmas morning that makes a certain kind of lie physically impossible. I said, "Your dad and your Aunt Melissa thought it would be a simpler Christmas without me this year." Silence. Then, small and clear, "That's not fair." I said, "Grown-ups do things that aren't fair sometimes, buddy. It doesn't mean they don't love you." He said, "Are you coming for New Year's?" I said, "I don't think I've been invited." Caleb said, "I'm inviting you." And then, before I could answer, I heard his mother's footsteps, and Caleb said fast, "Grandpa, I love you," and hung up. I sat with the dead phone in my hand for a long time. Around 11 that morning, Nora Ellsbury pulled into my driveway in the old red pickup that used to be her father's. Nora is 61, silver-braided, county fire commissioner for 18 years, and the only person besides Ellen who has ever been allowed to tell me I look tired without me arguing. She let herself in the back door because that is what she's always done. She set a foil-wrapped plate on my counter and said, "Ham, don't argue." I did not argue. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "Walter, I am not going to insult you by asking how you are. I am going to ask you something else." I waited. She said, "The board voted 3 weeks ago. 43 years. Lifetime service dinner, New Year's Eve at the hall. I have been trying to hand you the envelope for a week, and you have been dodging me on purpose because you thought you were going to be at your kids'." I set my coffee down. She said, "The chief already called Douglas's office and Melissa's house. He didn't know they had told you not to come home. He invited them personally. Both of them said yes." I looked at her. She looked back at me. She said quietly, "Walter, I am not going to uninvite your children on your behalf. That is not my ceremony to run. But I want you to know what room you are walking into. Your children are going to be in it. And so is the mother of that boy you carried out from under the hood." Nora slid the envelope across my kitchen table. Heavy stock, the county seal embossed in gold, my name and careful hand are recognized as the chief's wife's calligraphy. Captain Walter James Harmon, 43 years of service. I did not open it. I turned it face down, and I laid my palm flat on it. Nora watched me do that and did not comment. She has known me since before her father died, and she understands that some men need to touch a thing before they can look at it. Finally, I said, "Nora, if I don't go, what happens?" She said, "The chief reads your record aloud to an empty chair, and the town notices, and your children get to go home to their houses and pretend nothing happened. Is that what you want?" I said, "No." She said, "Then you go, You wear the dress coat. You let Dr. Chen introduce you. You let the town see you." I said the name back to her. "Dr. Chen?" Nora nodded once. "Lily Chen, Emergency Medicine, County Hospital. She's giving the introduction. She asked to." I said, "Nora, I don't know a Dr. Chen." Nora smiled a very small smile, the kind you learn to do at 61 when you know a thing another person doesn't. She said, "Walter, you know her. You just haven't known her name in 30 years. She stood up. She patted my shoulder once, the way her father used to, and she left me alone at the table with the envelope face down. That afternoon, I went up into the attic for the first time in 11 years. The pull-down stairs still worked. The dust up there smelled the way attic dust smells in an old wood house, like paper and mothballs and the ghost of a woman's perfume. In the far corner, under a canvas tarp, was the footlocker I had brought home from my father's estate in 1970, and inside it, in a manila envelope tied with kitchen twine, were the letters. Not combat letters. I do not have those and never did. These were the letters Ellen and I had written each other during the 15 years she was sick, on the nights I was called out and could not be home. Short letters, some of them just a folded page with a single line. I sat on the attic floor and I pulled out the one I was looking for. It was in my own hand, dated the 8th of November, 11 years ago, the night she died. I had written it in the truck on the way home from the reservoir, in the dashboard light, before I knew, and I had come in the back door with it in my coat pocket and found Melissa already there, and Douglas on the phone from 300 miles away, and Ellen already gone. And I had slipped that letter into the pocket of my coat, and I had never taken it out. I had folded it into this envelope years later. My children had never known it existed. I put it in the breast pocket of my dress coat. Douglas texted me at 4:12 p.m. on Christmas Day. "Dad, can I call?" I stared at those 4 words for 10 minutes. Then I typed back, "Yes." The phone rang 30 seconds later. Douglas said, "Dad," then nothing. He is not a man who cries easily, and I could hear him trying not to. Finally, he said, "I saw the video." I said, "I know." He said, "Dad, Sarah's mother, she isn't even, the guest room thing wasn't." He stopped. He tried again. "Dad, I told Caleb you had a rescue thing." I did not help him. I have helped Douglas out of a lot of small holes in his life, and I had decided, sitting there on the attic floor 2 hours earlier, that this was not going to be one of them. He said, "The chief called my office 2 weeks ago. He invited us to some dinner on New Year's Eve." I said yes, because I thought it would be nice. I said, "And then you told me not to come home?" He said, "Dad." I said, "Douglas, I am going to be at that dinner because it is my dinner. You do what you think is right." A pause. So long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Dad, did Melissa also?" I said, "Yes." I heard him breathe out. He said, "Oh, God." I said, "Merry Christmas, son," and I hung up because I did not want him to hear my voice change. By the 27th, the footage had run on a loop for 3 days on the regional station, been picked up nationally on the 4th, and my landline had rung so many times I had unplugged it. On the morning of the 28th, a knock came at my back door. I opened it expecting Nora. Standing on my porch was a woman I did not immediately recognize, mid-30s, wool coat, a small boy on her hip. It was the mother from the ditch. I had not until that moment seen her upright. She said, "Captain Harmon." I said, "Ma'am." She said, "My name is Rachel Perry. This is Wyatt." Wyatt looked at me with the enormous open eyes of a 4-year-old who had decided I was interesting. He said, in the same clear voice he had used under the hood of the car, "You called me champion." I said, "Yes, sir, I did." His mother's face did something complicated. She said, "Captain, I know you didn't do it for a thank you, but I have to say it out loud once or I am going to spend the rest of my life not saying it." She said, thank you for my sons." I could not speak. Wyatt reached out very solemnly and put his small mittened hand on my cheek. His mother said, more quietly, "The chief called me about your dinner. He asked if we would come." She looked at me. "We're coming, if that's all right." I nodded because I could not do anything else. Melissa did not call me on Christmas Day. She did not call on the 26th. She did not call on the 27th. On the 28th, a little after 9 at night, my phone lit up. I let it ring 3 times. I picked up. She said, "Daddy." I said, "Melissa." She said, Kevin thinks the optics of us not being at that dinner would be." She stopped. I let the silence do the work. She started again. She said, "Daddy, I don't know how to talk to you right now." I said, "I'm listening, sweetheart." She said, "When Mom died, you weren't there, and I have carried that around for 11 years. And now everybody is calling you a hero, and I don't know where to put that." I closed my eyes. I said, "Melissa, I am not going to have that conversation on the phone." She said, "Then when?" I said, "New Year's Eve, after the dinner, you and your brother, you come to the firehouse. I will tell you both a thing about your mother I have never told you." A long pause. Then she said, in the smallest voice I have heard from her since she was 7 and lost her cat, "Daddy, is it bad?" I said, "No, honey, it isn't bad. It just belongs to you now, and it should have belonged to you a long time ago." She was crying when she hung up. I sat on the couch and I made myself a promise I intended to keep. New Year's Eve dawned cold and clear, the ice storm long gone, the county roads dry for the first time in a week. I ironed my white shirt at the kitchen table with the little travel iron Ellen had bought me 40 years ago. I laid the dress coat across the back of the chair. I put the folded letter, the one dated the 8th of November 11 years ago, into the inside breast pocket. Around 3 in the afternoon, Raymond pulled up in his truck to drive me because Nora had decided I was not going to arrive at my own honor dinner behind the wheel of a work pickup. I did not argue with Nora about this because you do not argue with Nora about ceremonies. Raymond looked at me in the passenger seat and said, "Cap, you want to talk about anything?" I said no. He said, "You want to not talk about anything?" I said yes. He grinned and turned the radio to the country station, and we drove the 8 miles to the community hall in a silence that was the kind of silence 40 years of 2 men working the same rescues will earn you. The parking lot was full a full hour before the ceremony. I saw Douglas's car. I saw Melissa's husband's car. I saw a car I did not recognize and knew from the plates was a rental. I put my hand over the inside pocket where the letter was folded, and I got out of the truck. The hall smelled like coffee and old wood and the kind of perfume women my age wear on holidays. Somebody had strung up the twinkle lights the ladies' auxiliary uses for the fall dance. Somebody else had set the long trestle tables end to end and covered them with white paper. On the far wall above the head table, someone had hung an enormous blown-up photograph of me at 24, standing next to Chief Ellsbury, the yellowed one from the firehouse. I had not known they had had it copied. Douglas saw me first. He was standing near the coffee urn in a suit he was too tall for, and when he turned and saw me, his whole face did something I had never seen his face do. It collapsed and then reset in about a second and a half. He walked toward me. He did not embrace me because we are not a family that does that in public. He put a hand on my shoulder and he said, "Dad." I said, "Douglas." Melissa was behind him in a navy blue dress, Kevin at her elbow looking at his shoes. She did not come closer. She looked at me across the room, and I looked back at her, and something passed between us that did not need words. Then Nora Ellsbury took my elbow and steered me toward the head table and said, over her shoulder to my children, "You two, second row, somebody will show you." She said it in the voice she uses for volunteers she does not fully trust yet. My children obeyed. At 7 o'clock, the chief tapped the microphone. He said a few things about the department, and then he said, "Before I read Captain Harmon's record aloud, we have a guest who asked to introduce him. Please welcome Dr. Lily Chen, Emergency Physician, County Hospital." A woman in her late 30s walked up to the podium. Small, dark hair pinned back, wire glasses, the composed stillness of somebody who works nights. She adjusted the microphone. She said, "Good evening. Most of you don't know me. I moved back to this county 8 years ago to take a job at the hospital. But I grew up here, and 31 years ago, when I was 7 years old, I went through the ice at Pickerel Reservoir." The room went completely still. She said, "The man who came out on the rope that night is sitting at this table tonight. I do not remember his face. I remember his voice, and I remember that he told me, under the water, to hold on to his belt. I did. He is the reason I am a doctor. He is the reason my 2 daughters exist. He is the reason my mother, who is here with me tonight, did not lose me." She paused. She looked directly at Douglas and Melissa in the second row. She said quietly, "I want to say something to Captain Harmon's children, whom I have never met. Your father was not absent from you. He was very present, somewhere else, doing something that mattered to somebody's mother. I am somebody's mother. Thank you." She stepped down. The room did not applaud. It could not. The chief opened his mouth to read the record, and Rachel Perry stood up from a table near the back. She was holding Wyatt on her hip. She said, "Chief, may I?" The chief looked at me. I nodded once. Rachel walked to the podium with the boy on her hip, and she did not adjust the microphone because it was already at her height. She said, "I don't have a speech. I have a 4-year-old." She set Wyatt down on the podium platform beside her. She said, "Wyatt, do you want to say the thing you told me in the car this afternoon?" Wyatt looked out over the room. He was not afraid. 4-year-olds do not know to be afraid of rooms of adults. He said into the microphone, "That man over there," and he pointed at me across the hall, "that man told me my name was Champion for 30 seconds because champions don't move their necks." A soft laugh moved through the room, a laugh with something else underneath it. Wyatt was not done. He said, "My mama said he pulled my brother and my mama out too. My mama said we would all be dead." Rachel put her hand on his shoulder to stop him, but he had one more thing to say. He looked at me across the length of the hall, and he said, in the small, solemn voice of a boy who has clearly rehearsed with his mother, "Thank you for our lives." Melissa, in the second row, put both hands over her mouth and did not take them down for a very long time. The chief did not read the whole record. He had told me he was going to, but standing at the microphone, he changed his mind, and I understood why. He said, 43 years on the volunteer roster, 962 documented rescue calls, 17 commendations from the state fire marshal, 1 reservoir rescue in '84, 1 structure fire in '91 where he carried out 3 residents from a rooming house on Elm before the roof came down, 1 highway extraction 6 days ago. He set the folder down. He said, "I am not going to read the rest tonight because Captain Harmon does not like it and because we would be here until midnight. What I am going to say is this. Some of you know that Captain Harmon lost his wife Ellen 11 years ago. Some of you know he has kept the roster running without missing a single monthly meeting since her funeral. What most of you don't know is that in those 43 years, he never once took the paid captain slot when it was offered. He said the money should go to the young men with children at home. I would like Captain Harmon to stand up." I stood up. I did not know where to put my hands. The room stood up with me, and it stayed standing. And I looked out over the tables, and I saw my son Douglas on his feet, weeping the way a grown man weeps when he has finally understood something at a great cost. When the applause finally stopped and the plates started coming out from the kitchen, the chief handed me the microphone. I had promised Nora I would say something short. I said, "I have 3 sentences. The first is thank you. The second is that I did not do any of it alone. And if the men and women who backed me up over 43 years would stand for a moment, I would like the room to see who I mean. Half the room stood. Raymond, Nora, 20 others in their department jackets. I let it hold. I said, "The third sentence is this. My wife Ellen is not in this room tonight, but if she were, she would tell you she pushed me out the door on more nights than I want to count, because she understood something about this work that I sometimes forget to say out loud. It is not a choice between the people you love and the people who need you. It is the same choice. She knew that. I owe her the record I have. That is all I have to say." I sat down. Nobody applauded because nobody knew whether they were supposed to. Melissa was staring at the tablecloth. Douglas was staring at me. Caleb, whom I had not even noticed it come, Douglas must have brought him, must have decided that morning, was sitting beside his father with his mouth slightly open, looking at me like he had never quite seen me before, which, I suppose, he had. After the dinner, after the handshakes, after Rachel Perry had hugged me at the door with Wyatt asleep on her shoulder and whispered, "You come to his birthday, you come every year," Raymond drove me back to the firehouse, and I asked him to leave me there. I told Douglas and Melissa to meet me in the meeting room upstairs at 11:30. They both came. Kevin did not. Melissa asked him to wait in the car, and he had the good sense to agree. Caleb was asleep in the back of Douglas's car under a coat. I sat at the head of the long meeting table where I have sat for 2 decades. My children sat opposite me. I took the folded letter out of my breast pocket. I set it on the table between us. I said, "This is a letter I wrote to your mother on the night she died, in the truck, coming home from Pickerel Reservoir, where I had spent 4 hours cutting a 14-year-old boy out of the ice." Douglas's face went white. Melissa did not move. I said, "I did not know your mother was dying that night. Your mother did. She called me at 7:11 that evening. The pager had just gone off. She said, and I am going to give you her exact words because they belong to you now. She said, 'Walter, you can't help me here. Go.' She hung up. I went. She was gone by the time I got home." Neither of them spoke. I slid the letter across the table. Douglas picked it up. His hands shook. He unfolded it. Melissa moved her chair around so she could read it with him. I did not need to read it because I had written it. It said only this, in my own handwriting. "Ellen, the boy is out. He is breathing. I am coming home. I love you more than the 43 years I have not been able to say it right. Walter." Douglas read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully on the table, flat, the way you set down a thing you are afraid of tearing. He said, "Dad." I said, "Your mother sent me out that night, every night. She was the reason. I let you both believe otherwise because you were 19 and 21 and you needed somewhere to put your grief, and I decided a dead mother was a bad place to put it. So I let you put it on me." Melissa said, "Daddy." I said, "I am telling you tonight because you are old enough now, and because your children need to know who their grandmother was. She was not a woman who was left behind. She was a woman who sent me. There is a difference." Douglas put his face in his hands. Melissa reached across the table and she took my hand, my daughter, who has not held my hand since she was 15, and she held it, and she cried without making a sound, the way her mother used to. And the letter sat between us on the table like a small folded map of a country none of us had known we lived in. 9 days later, on a plain Tuesday in January, I was rebuilding the pump seals on Engine 2 in the Firehouse Bay when a small silver car pulled into the apron and Melissa got out. She was wearing jeans, which is a thing I had not seen my daughter wear in perhaps 15 years, and she was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She walked into the bay and she handed me one without saying anything, and she sat down on the diamond plate step of the engine and watched me work for a while. Finally, she said, "Daddy, can I ask you something I never asked you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What was Mom's favorite thing about you?" I set the wrench down. I thought about it a long time, because there is a specific answer, and I had never told anyone. I said, "Your mother told me once that her favorite thing about me was that when I came home at 4 in the morning, I would sit on the edge of the bed and take my boots off one at a time very quietly so I would not wake her, even though she was already awake, because she wanted me to think I had not woken her. She said that was love. That is what she told me." Melissa was quiet. Then she said, "Daddy, will you teach Caleb how to check a smoke detector?" I said, "Yes, honey, whenever you bring him." She said, "I'll bring him next weekend." And she drove home. And I stood in the bay for a long time, and I did not, for once, feel alone. People like clean endings. Real life is rarely that tidy. Douglas and I are still working on it. He calls now on Sunday nights, awkwardly, the way a grown son calls a father he is meeting for the first time at 41. Some Sundays we run out of things to say after 8 minutes, and we sit on the line breathing at each other, and that is all right. That is a kind of progress. Melissa brought Caleb to the firehouse 3 times in February, and once he asked to try on my dress coat, and I let him, and it hung on him like a tent. Rachel Perry sends me a photograph of Wyatt every month on the 24th. I keep them in a drawer. Caleb asked me the other day, standing on a step stool in his mother's kitchen fixing a smoke detector under my supervision, "Grandpa, do you forgive Dad and Aunt Melissa for telling you not to come home?" I thought about it. I said, "Buddy, I am still learning what that word means. Ask me again in a year." He accepted that answer the way 9-year-olds accept honest answers, which is to say, completely. The letter sits in a frame on Ellen's dresser now, where I moved it in February. I look at it most mornings. I do not think the men who quietly save other people's families on holidays get medals from the ones they love. I think, if they are lucky, they get a plain Tuesday and a paper cup of coffee. That is what I got. If someone in your life has been carrying something you decided was absence, call them tonight, while there is still time.